At the turn of the century, many historians wrote cutesy fluff pieces in the media about who had been the most influential person of the 20th century. Many names were floated: Hitler, Stalin, Churchill, Einstein, Gandhi. One name that didn't appear on many lists was that of Frederick Taylor. While Frederick Taylor's name is not known to most people, his impact on the 20th century was quite profound.
Taylor was a management theorist, a theorist of the labor process.
In an era where the capitalist firm was becoming larger and larger, employing more and more workers, a fundamental problem was emerging. How do we get workers to work more? Of course, this had always been a problem for capitalists, but the rapidly expanding size of the factory was demanding more nuanced control over workers to ensure maximum output.
During the late 1800s and early 1900s, Frederick Taylor experimented with, studied, and wrote about the theory of work. His goal was to find a way of controlling the motions of workers so as to attain the highest maximum output per dollar spent on wages. His writings are an incredibly frank and lucid distillation of the theory of class struggle from the capitalist perspective. Very rarely do we see the capitalist class engaging in such frank and open discussions about the nature of exploitation. The frankness of his writings almost eliminates the need for interpretation, and thus much of this video will just be excerpts from his own writing.
For Taylor, there was a fundamental problem afflicting modern society. Workers didn't work hard enough. Taylor called such laziness soldiering.
We can see our forests vanishing, our water power is going to waste, the end of our coal and iron is in sight. But the larger waste of human effort, which go on every day through such of our acts as are blundering, ill-directed, or inefficient, are less visible, less tangible, and are but vaguely appreciated.
Taylor is shocked that the inefficiency of workers hasn't created a national outcry.
As yet, there has been no public agitation for greater national efficiency. No meetings have been called.
Taylor was often upset that those around him didn't share his obsession with efficiency, and it was an obsession.
Taylor was obsessive-compulsive. As a child, he counted his steps and measured all of his motions so as to achieve the maximum efficiency of his own actions.
In his adult life, he sought to impose his obsessive compulsions on all those around him, and eventually the entire capitalist world. And the capitalist world was ready for a Taylor. In the late 19th century, capitalism was growing fast, competition was accelerating, the firm was growing in size, and with it, the number of workers employed on a single shop floor. The need for increased control over this mass of workers was growing, as was the need for them to work more efficiently to stay competitive.
In a majority of cases, the man deliberately plans to do as little as he possibly can, to turn out far less work than he is well able to do. In many instances, to do not more than 1/3 to 1/2 of a proper day's work. This constitutes the greatest evil with which the working people of England and America are now afflicted.
For Taylor, a proper day's work meant the maximum level of output humanly possible. He often called it a fair day's work.
When workers were not physically capable of working a fair day's work, he fired them.
Why did workers soldier? Taylor never was able to give an answer to this question. To him, it represented one big misunderstanding between capitalists and workers. Actually, Taylor argued, there was no fundamental antagonism between workers and capitalists.
The majority of these men believe that the fundamental interests of employees and employers are necessarily antagonistic. Scientific management, on the contrary, has for its very foundation the firm conviction that the true interests of the two are one and the same.
Soldiering was made possible because capitalists didn't even know how much work it was possible to extract from workers.
The greater part of the systematic soldiering is done by the men with the deliberate object of keeping their employers ignorant of how fast work can be done.
Taylor's goal was to take this knowledge of work from the worker and put it in the hands of management to be used as a tool for control of workers. He called this scientific management.
As a science, management can refine the labor process to a point of efficiency far greater than any worker could achieve on their own.
The science which underlies each workman's act is so great and amounts to so much that the workman who is best suited to actually doing the work is incapable, either through lack of education or through insufficient mental capacity, of understanding this science.
Note the wording, workmen who are best suited. Who are these best suited workers? Well, workers who were too intelligent, too stubborn, or physically incapable of working at maximum output were not best suited for the job.
Taylor envisioned a perfectly harmonious social order where all workers were employed in occupations where they could work most efficiently. They would be accompanied by a strata of scientific managers who analyzed their emotions and reorganized them for maximum output. Anyone who didn't fit into this perfect vision of the world would be fired.
The greatest prosperity can exist only when the individual has reached his highest state of efficiency. That is when he is turning out his largest daily output. The search for better, more competent men was never more vigorous than it is now. It is only when we fully realize that our duty as well as our opportunity lies in systematically cooperating to train and to make this competent man that we shall be on the road to national efficiency.
The entire structure of production and society would revolve around the creation of this new efficient human.
In the past, man has been first. In the future, the system must be first. The fundamental principles of scientific management are applicable to all kinds of human activities, from our simplest individual acts to the works of our greatest corporations. The same principles can be applied with equal force to all social activities, to the management of our homes, the management of our farms, the management of the business of our tradesmen, large and small, of our churches, our philanthropic institutions, our universities, and our governmental departments.
We can just imagine how satisfying such a rationalized fantasy world must have seemed to his obsessive-compulsive mind. A big part of this fantasy world was Taylor's concept of harmony between classes. Taylor believed that all the workers he was retraining to work harder were his personal friends, and that he had their best interests at heart, even if they didn't know that. He persisted in this fantasy even when workers threatened to kill him.
The men who were under me were my personal friends. I used every expedient to make them do a fair day's work, such as discharging or lowering the wages of more stubborn men who refused to make any improvement.
Taylor started his management career at the Midvale Steel Company outside Philadelphia.
As soon as I became gang boss, the men who were working under me and who, of course, knew that I was on to the whole game of soldiering or deliberately restricted output, came to me at once and said, "Now, Fred, are you going to be a damn piecework hog, are you?" I said, "If you fellows mean you were afraid I'm going to try to get a larger output from these lathes," I said, "yes, I do propose to get more work out." I said, "You must remember I have been square with you fellows up to now and worked with you. I've been on your side of the fence, but now I have accepted the job under the management of this company, and I'm on the other side of the fence, and I will tell you perfectly frankly that I'm going to try to get a bigger output from those lathes." They answered, "Then you are going to be a damned hog." Now that was the beginning of a piecework fight that lasted for nearly 3 years, as I remember it, in which I was doing everything in my power to increase the output of the shop, while the men were absolutely determined that the output should not be increased. I began, of course, by directing some one man to do more work than he had done before, and then I got on the lathe myself and showed him that it could be done. In spite of this, he went ahead and turned out exactly the same old output and refused to adopt better methods or to work quicker until finally I laid him off and got another man in his place. This new man, I could not blame him in the least of circumstances, turned right around and joined the other fellows and refused to do any more work than the rest.
Notice how he says you can't blame this man for not wanting to work harder. In several of Taylor's accounts of the Midvale Steel battle, he does admit to some sort of fundamental antagonism between workers and managers.
As a truthful man, I had to tell them that if I were in their place, I would fight against turning out any more work, just as they were doing, because under the piecework system, they would be allowed to earn no more wages than they had been earning, and yet they would be made to work harder.
Taylor was convinced that workers needed a material reward for working harder. A fundamental part of his theory of scientific management was the permanent raising of wages for workers who conformed to this new scientific work ethic. Taylor thought that capitalists would consent to higher wages because the increased cost of higher wages would be compensated for by the increased size and output, and the diminished size of the workforce. But, to Taylor's great dismay, once new levels of efficiency had been reached, most employers chose to slash rates, and wages returned to normal or even lower. In fact, the effect of scientific management was to reduce the skill set of the working class as a whole, which in turn reduced labor's bargaining power and lowered wages. It seemed there were some fundamental class antagonisms immune to Taylor's utopian philosophy.